Hey guys, welcome back to Libby's Lounge, Patreon edition, where we are recording the unofficial audiobook for the Assassin's Alliance. We are on chapter 27. So let's just dive right in. Chapter 27, Maureen. It was a good thing her apartment was close to the Institute because they were running late. Relax, Andrew said as they entered the lobby, suitcases in tow. It's a private jet. They're not leaving without us. I don't like to be late, Maureen countered, her stomach in knots. Mike's appearance felt like a bad omen, and I hate letting Francis down. I think you can murder half the staff, and Senior would find a reason to justify it, he said with a laugh. They waved to the lobby guards and headed straight to the elevator. You grab the vials from Charlie. Meet me at Eileen's in 20? She nodded and kissed his cheek, then headed in the opposite direction. Interrogation in the biolab sat below the Institute, with a single elevator that serviced the area. It took 2 secure hallways and a set of stairs to reach it. The path so familiar after 5 years of working with Elijah on Sin, she could do it in her sleep. And to be honest, she was pretty sure she had. She punched in her unique security code and hit the call button. The silence of the hall pressed into her as the numbers decreased on the screen, her foot tapping with nervous energy. Something was off. Maybe it had been Mike putting her on edge, but Oliver almost died. Would Francis tell them if she died? He would have to for the liaison position. The doors slid open, and Rosemary looked up in surprise. Hey, she said, straightening up as Maureen stepped in. Maureen eyed her with trepidation, but gave a small smile. Not that she made it a habit to avoid being alone in an elevator with Rosemary, but it certainly didn't bring back great memories. I thought you were in D.C., Maureen said. Rosemary shrugged in response. Maureen might have forgiven Rosemary for her part in her first Sin trip, but Rosemary's brothers hadn't. The team hadn't. 3 years ago, Rosemary departed from the team to take a liaison position in D.C. for Elijah. That was the cover story, but she'd been voted out because no one trusted her, and you couldn't have a team without trust. Going to Charlie? Rosemary asked. Maureen nodded. Supplies. How's D.C.? A spark of excitement lit behind her eyes. It's good. Great, even. The door slid open before she could ask why, and Maureen gestured for Rosemary to leave first. Rosemary rolled her eyes and led the way down the interrogation hall to the lab. Even when it was empty, the screams of the past inhabitants seemed to leech onto Maureen, and as they passed the third interrogation room, a chill pulsed through her body, tracing the track of Sin had carved into her veins. She thought after hundreds of times passing the door, it would subside, and her mind would realize she was never going back in there. But her subconscious refused to get on board with the logic, and a hard shiver passed through her for what felt like the 1,000th time. The secured entrance to the lab sat at the end of the hall, and Maureen let Rosemary unlock the first 2 doors with biometrics. But as they reached the actual lab door, Rosemary stepped aside. Maureen smirked and leaned forward, the retinal scanner chiming their admittance. Rosemary might be Elijah's favorite, but only 4 people had access to this room: Charlie, Francis, Elijah, and Maureen. The last time Rosemary had been allowed in the lab, she mixed 2 serums that were almost ready for testing. To say Elijah had been angry was an understatement. Maureen pushed the door open and came up short, Rosemary bumping into her. Elijah leaned against the lab table, a notebook in his hand, as Charlie spoke rapidly. Her eyes locked on the microscope in front of her. He looked up in surprise and then smiled at her. Maureen, I was afraid I was going to miss you. Bali, huh? Rosemary pushed past her, spurring Maureen into movement, and she returned his smile. Yeah, Andrew and I lucked out. I may have put in a good word for you, he said and pushed off the table. Charlie looked up as if just realizing they had more guests in the room. Long black and gray curls danced around the woman's head, and she slid her safety glasses to sit on top of them. Cutting it close, she said, pushing the rolling stool away from the counter to the locked fridge behind her. She pressed her thumbprint and opened the cold drawer. Yeah, I couldn't decide what to pack, Maureen said, rounding the table. Elijah held out the notebook for her, and she took it, flipping through the notes. He stepped around her as she continued to scan the pages of notes and grabbed a travel cooler from the shelf, taking the padded tray of vials from Charlie. He gave Maureen a questioning look. The normal protocol was to bring sedatives on trips, but the bright blue liquid was impossible to hide. Sin? For Bali? Maureen kept her face schooled. Yeah, I thought it couldn't hurt. Maybe get some field practice in if the opportunity arose. He gave an approving laugh and closed the cooler, handing it over for Maureen to code the lock with her biometrics. When you get back from Bali, come find me. I have a proposition for you. Of the Sin variety? She asked, her interest piqued. She didn't enjoy spending time with Elijah, but Francis had asked her to keep an eye on his advancements with Sin. It turned out when she wasn't on the receiving end of the drug, she found the entire process of creating it, administering it, and altering it fascinating. You could say that. Rosemary, bring me this round of reports when Charlie finishes them. I'll be in my office. Yes, sir, Rosemary said, standing across the room, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else than in the lab. He nodded at them and left. Maureen leaned over the microscope, looking at the bacteria on the slides. How's the next generation coming along? She asked. She and Charlie had been working on newer versions of Sin for Elijah. Well, Charlie had. Maureen had been trying to learn as much as she could. How did it work? How did Charlie alter it? How did they make the antidote serum? Difficult, Charlie said, pulling the notebook towards her and flipping the pages. Look, since the bacteria replicate so rapidly, we're watching mutations happen within hours, days. What I'm seeing right now is an unexpected mutation in the hybrids. I want to isolate this new generation of hybrid and determine what gene is actively changing so I can determine the mechanism of action. When can we test again? Maureen asked. Charlie raised her eyebrows at her. We are months, if not years out from testing, Mo. Don't rush it. Disappointment settled in her stomach. The last generation of Sin had increased the interrogation time before the antidote needed to be given, but it wasn't long enough. They needed more time. Her eyes looked to Rosemary, hovering over a tray of pink serum sitting on the counter. If you touch that, Maureen said, I will inject you with it. Rosemary lifted her eyes. I overdosed you once. You act like I killed you. You ruined my last round of testing, Charlie said and pointed to a new sign that hung on the wall. Do not let Rosemary touch anything. EFW. I would take a nice long bathroom break and let Maureen do whatever she wants. Rosemary flipped them off but retreated 2 steps, clasping her hands behind her back, and glared. Aren't you supposed to be catching a plane to... She looked at Maureen. Bali, Maureen said automatically, looking at the wall clock. Shit. She looked down at the notebook. They had to be close. If she didn't have so many responsibilities, she could stay with Charlie in the lab for days without ever leaving. Go, Charlie said, looking over at Maureen. We aren't as close as you think we are. We never are. Go enjoy your vacation. What kind of vacation do you think I'm taking with these? She asked, patting the cooler. A fun one? Charlie said with a wicked smile. Maureen shook her head. If you say so. She grabbed the cooler from the table, but paused by the door, looking back at Rosemary, a pang of guilt hitting her. If Maureen hadn't come around, would Rosemary have been kicked off the team? Andrew would say yes. But Maureen understood the pain of being sent away from your family and friends because you weren't good for the business. It sucked. Hey, Rosemary. I'm glad to see it's working out for you. You seem happy. Rosemary's expression softened. Thanks. I am. Maureen could hear the argument even before opening the Gales' residence door, Paul's voice rising as she pushed it in. You can't sell Park Place to her for $10, he yelled. Most of the team sat around the coffee table, piles of colorful paper money indeed stacked beside them. I can do whatever I want, John laughed. You're just mad because you're about to go bankrupt. With Mary owning that whole side of the board, now I will, Paul whined. Mary looked up, meeting Maureen's amused look. Banker, I would like to build hotels on Park Place and Boardwalk, she said with a laugh. Eileen collected the money and dropped 2 hotels into Mary's outstretched hand. Should we just call the game now? You own 85% of the board. Mary put the hotels in the blue spaces, and Paul groaned. Ugh, I quit. He looked over at Maureen. They cheat when you're not here. Have you tried not sucking at the game? Maureen asked, dodging a decorative pillow flying her way with a laugh and ducking into the kitchen. She came up short, finding Andrew standing there eating a bowl of cereal, his Thai food forgotten on the counter, and Seamus sitting beside it with his laptop open. Hey, sorry I'm late, she said, as she placed the cooler beside Seamus. Charlie was updating me on the next round of testing. It's not leaving without us, Andrew reminded, and took another bite of food. What are you working on? Maureen asked Seamus, her gaze falling to his gloved hands as they danced across the keyboard. After her mother's torture, it took a year for Seamus to have near-full mobility in his hands, but the damage took him off the front lines, and he slid into the role of computer tech. It had been 5 years, and her gut still sunk when she thought about it. You don't want to know, he said with a mischievous grin, and Maureen didn't doubt she didn't want to. Eileen joined them, bumping Maureen's shoulder. Maureen smiled and leaned into her. Got everything? Eileen asked, nodding toward the cooler. And some, Maureen said. You going to be able to survive without me? You mean will I manage to run this team like I had for 10 years before you showed up? Definitely not. We're fucked. Maureen laughed, nudging Eileen, who laughed too. Be safe out there, Eileen said, sobering up. Andrew put his bowl in the sink and turned to leave, but Eileen stepped in front of him, her hands on her hips. Where do you think you're going? To catch our plane? He said, looking over to Seamus. Right? Eileen pointed to the sink. I am not your mother. Wash your dish. My sister was pissed we didn't do them last week. It was a whole thing. Andrew put his hands up and turned back to the sink. Yes, ma'am. A knock on the door pulled Maureen's attention, and she looked at Eileen. Who's that? She asked. Who's that? She asked. No one ever knocked. Eileen shrugged, and Maureen went to answer, as the knocking sounded again, more insistent. Coming, Maureen called. She pulled the door open, and the world stopped around her. Ross, the team lead of one of the younger blood teams, stood in the hall. In blood-drenched clothes, fear etched into his drawn and pale face. Maureen remembered the first time she'd seen him in the medical ward, the day she'd met Krista, Andrew's little sister. He was just a kid then, full of mischief and optimism, but they were teens now with real assignments and real dangers. There was no reason for him to be here unless... What happened? Maureen whispered, fear burrowing into her heart. It's Krista, he said. The room around her fell silent, and Eileen stuck her head out from the kitchen. Drew? Eileen called, eyes on Ross. I'm cleaning it, Andrew answered with a laugh. Andrew, Eileen said, full authority ringing in her voice. The water turned off, and he joined them in the entryway. Maureen looked up at him, the fear in her heart painting across his face. Ross? Andrew breathed, and Maureen laced her fingers through his, her pulse now slamming in her throat. Ross contorted his face, trying to hold back the tears as he said, There's been an accident. Andrew's hand tightened painfully on hers, but she remained silent. Krista's in surgery now. The playful energy of the team disappeared, and Maureen pulled Andrew's frozen form forward. Go, she said, realizing they wouldn't make their flight, but it didn't matter. His sister needed him. He looked down at her, and she saw the terror behind his mask. Your mom's on assignment, she reminded. You have to go. You need to be there for her. He gave a short nod but didn't move. John came up behind him. Come on, man, he said, placing his hand on Andrew's shoulder and guiding him forward. Go, Ross, we're on your 6. Ross nodded and spun, on his heel, not heading back to the elevator, but down the hall to the Finch residence, and Maureen's chest constricted. This wasn't a one-off accident. There must have been multiple casualties. John pushed Andrew forward. Maureen tugged along with them, and she pulled her hand from his. Andrew looked back, hurt filtering across his face. I'll be right there, she promised. I have to go lock up the cooler, and I need to talk to Francis. Shit, Andrew breathed. We need to leave. But she shook her head and raised on her toes, pressing a kiss to his lips. Don't even think about it, she insisted, not voicing the reality that they would need to leave. They'd spent 6 months prepping for this mission, and they may not have another opportunity to intercept. Go. I'll be right down. John grabbed his arm and tugged him toward the elevator. Mary and Paul slipped past to join them, and Maureen swallowed hard, turning around to meet Eileen's worried face. He can't go, Eileen said before Maureen could open her mouth. He won't be focused enough. He doesn't have a choice, Maureen countered. I know I'm not read in, but I might be able to fly solo, Maureen said. Let me find Francis. She returned to the kitchen and picked up the cooler off the counter, a weight settling over her as she slung it over her shoulder. Go. Be with him. I'll meet you down there. Eileen gave a solemn nod, and Maureen ignored the spinning ball in her stomach as she headed toward the elevator. There hadn't been many casualties since she joined the Legacy. Andrew's dad had died before she came along, and everyone else just seemed to be invincible. There were several very close calls, but they were always pulled back. Yet the haunted look in Ross's eyes terrified her as she got into the elevator. Mo, wait up, Seamus called, jogging down the hall. She stuck her hand out to hold the door, and he stepped inside beside her. She didn't ask why, just let the doors close and hit the combination to reach Francis's office. They rode in silence, images of Krista full of life running through her head. God, she was so young. They stepped into the hall, Maureen taking the lead to the double doors and knocking. It only took a moment for Francis to call them in. Francis was on the phone, the receiver between his ear and shoulder, making notes on a scrap of paper. Take any available Reapers. No. Pull them for now. I'll send Elijah to handle that. I'll be fine, Jeffrey. He hung up the phone and looked up at them, anger in his eyes. Not the 2 I was expecting. Maureen looked over at Seamus and flushed. What's going on? Mass casualty on assignment. 5 of the 7 injured, 1 dead on scene. Ross is the only one to walk away. How? I'm sending Jeffrey to figure that out. Accidents happen, but this? He shook his head. Our teams don't mess up that badly. The fact that he was sending his personal Reaper to investigate didn't ease the ball spinning in her stomach, and she wished she'd had gone with Andrew to the 5th floor. She should be there with him. Are we able to shift the arrival window at all? She asked. At least until Krista is out of surgery? Unfortunately not, he said, eyes flicking to Seamus, not going into any more detail. I need you gone in the hour. Can I go solo? Absolutely not. The finality in his words shut down all the reasons she could handle this. She let out a long sigh, and the idea of telling Andrew they needed to leave breaking her heart. This wasn't fair, but this was their life. I can go, Seamus offered. Maureen snapped her head to look at him. I'm not fully read in, but I know enough. This is Hale related. Seamus, this is a possible long-term assignment. It could be months. And that's his only sister, Seamus countered. If you send him away and something happens to Krista, Grace will raise hell when she returns. The Seward legacy may have shrunk, but it still holds a lot of sway with the board. And I'm guessing since this is Hale related, it's not sanctioned. Francis pinched the bridge of his nose and let out an aggravated sigh. 5 years, and she was still learning the politics and intricacies of how the legacy families worked, and what the board even did. But one thing she knew for sure, the Hale operation was against the laws. To protect her identity, Francis ran the mission without the board approval, since having a competitor's daughter in the inner circle was considered bad for business. Maureen raised an eyebrow at Seamus. Was that what he and Eileen were discussing? He gave a small shrug and frowned as if saying, worth a shot. Francis pressed his lips together, lost in thought. She knew Seamus coming along could work. They were to be newlyweds staying in the same villa as the suspected Hale leak. She had to go. The plan hinged on them recognizing her as Mike's ex-girlfriend and gaining their trust. Who she went with kind of didn't matter. I'm assuming this was Eileen's idea? Francis asked. Maureen shrugged, but Seamus nodded. She's worried Andrew will not be focused enough to keep them both safe and complete the mission. This is terrible timing, Francis said, mostly to himself, and shook his head. Fine. Let Andrew know he's grounded and get going. The window for interception is a small one. Maureen couldn't ever remember the 5th floor being so full, the families and teammates filling the lobby. Seamus bumped her arm and pointed across the room where their team sat on the floor, backs pressed to the wall with Andrew in the middle. His head dropped to his knees. Any news? She asked as they approached. John shook his head. No, but they just lost Dave. Nausea threatened to take over, and Maureen sucked in a breath, trying to stem it. Andrew looked up, his eyes red. I know. We need to go. He went to push himself up, and Maureen squatted, putting her hands on his knees, stopping him from standing. She licked her lips, suddenly realizing she did not want to go. Not without him. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate Seamus stepping in, but she and Andrew had been treating this as a romantic vacation. They were playing newlyweds. This was one of those assignments that was worth the nightmares they endured, the screams of their dead falling quiet while they indulged in the fantasy of a peaceful life. She shook her head. Stay. We don't have to go? He asked, the relief on his face breaking her heart. He would go if she asked him to, but she couldn't. Not with Krista's fate unknown. You don't, she clarified. You're grounded. What? His face darkened. He can't ground me. He can, Eileen said, leaning forward. But I did. You need to be here. You're in no shape to go. Andrew glared at her and then turned the look on Maureen. You can't go alone. I'm not. Seamus is coming with me, Maureen said, looking over at Eileen, meeting her best friend's gaze, trying to convey her appreciation in just the look. Eileen nodded, managing a half smile, and she looked back at Andrew. I'll be fine. Better than fine, brother, Seamus said. He crouched down, and Maureen moved over so he could put a gloved hand on Andrew's shoulder. I'll bring her home in one piece. You mean I'll bring you home in one piece, Maureen countered, trying to bring some levity to the space. I'm pretty sure I saved your life last time. That was 2 times ago, Seamus countered. You're forgetting where I pulled you out of the burning building. Oh, now you've got them started, Paul said, standing up. I'm grabbing coffee. Actually, I'm going to pick up the beans and roast them myself. They may be done comparing dick sizes by the time I get back. Anyone want any? Andrew laughed, and the sound eased the pain in her chest. We're going, Maureen said, bearing the sadness those words elicited. She pressed a kiss to Andrew's forehead, Seamus disappearing to say goodbye to Eileen. It was going to be fine. This was an intel mission. They were on a beach. It was only a few months, max. What could go wrong? And that is the end of chapter 27. Obviously, we know a lot can go wrong in a few months on a beach with assassins. So I do hope you enjoyed that chapter, and I will see you guys for chapter 28.